Hey everyone, it's Lauren from the blog laurennicolejones.com, and today I'm going to be covering all things sourdough starter. And if you guys are new to sourdough starter, this is the place for you to be, so let's dive in. Having a sourdough starter in your kitchen is like having a little piece of history in your kitchen. I know for some families, their sourdough starters have been passed down generation to generation. So if you just feed this thing and keep it alive and well, it will be in the family for years to come. So I have mine right here, and it is just in this glass jar here. I like to keep it in a jar with a glass top lid. It's also good to have glass and not metal because metal can react negatively with the beneficial yeast that's inside. Start with a glass jar or a glass bowl. Back before we had access to the little yeast packets that we find in the store today, there wasn't any way for bread to rise or even to bake, so that's when sourdough starter really became a really popular thing. So sourdough starter is used as a wild yeast, and it is completely unprocessed, and it just uses the natural fermentation of letting it sit and bubble and ferment. So let's just talk about phytic acid for a second. Phytic acid is basically an anti-nutrient that helps to preserve grains. And it's found in yeast packets, it is found in beans and nuts, certain beans and nuts, and it's basically something that is meant to preserve. It also doesn't allow the body to absorb certain nutrients, which is why we don't want to have it in our food. Our bodies really weren't meant to digest grains that way. So that is really why I love the sourdough starter so much, is because it contains wild yeast, which smells delicious too when it is fermenting, and it is just free of phytic acid, and it makes it really easy for our bodies to digest, which is cool because a lot of people with gluten insensitivities can tolerate sourdough and sourdough products because of the natural breakdown of the gluten. So let's dive into making a sourdough starter from scratch. So you will need a glass bowl, just like this one, and then you're gonna need a tea towel. You're also gonna need a wooden spoon for mixing well. And then it just includes flour and water. So on the first day, you're gonna get a cup of water and a cup of flour, and you're gonna add it to this glass bowl. And you're gonna mix it really well into the glass bowl. You shouldn't have any clumps left, it should be really smooth. And then you'll drape a tea towel over the bowl and let it rest for 24 hours. And don't touch it. Day 2, this will be really hard to do, but you'll wanna take half of that flour mixture out of the bowl and dump it down the drain. So you'll have one half left. Then once that half is discarded, you'll want to add another cup of flour and another cup of water into your bowl with the starter that's already in there. And you'll drape a tea towel over it and you'll let it rest for another 24 hours. And if you're wondering why we discard half, it's simply because you'll have so much sourdough starter overflowing out of the bowl if you don't discard half, that there'll be a lot of sourdough starter and none of it will really be mature. We want to capture that wild yeast, so you want that mature sourdough starter from the day before to really incorporate into the new flour and water that's being mixed in. The mixture that's getting fed the right amount of flour and the right amount of water is growing a colony of yeast and bacteria that makes it sourdough basically. So it might seem wasteful, but I assure you that just discarding half of it will ensure that you have a good mature sourdough starter in the works. Day 3, 4, and 5, you're gonna do the same thing. You're gonna discard half, and then you're gonna add a cup of water and a cup of flour back into the bowl and put a tea towel over it to let it ferment for another 24 hours. So on day 6, it's gonna change a little bit. You're gonna still discard half of your starter, and then you're going to add in a cup of flour, a cup of water, and then you're gonna repeat the process every 12 hours. And then on the last day, day 7, you're gonna do the same thing. Discard half, and put in another cup of water and another cup of flour every 12 hours, and then you're done. You have a really nice, mature sourdough starter. So some of my top 5 sourdough starter tips for a beginner that might not be very comfortable with it: pick a pretty warm spot for your sourdough starter to sit. Stir very well. You don't want any clumps in your starter. You want to make sure all that flour and water is broken down into the bowl. I have a blog post written on it if you're interested in just copying down on a piece of paper the process. Feel free to add in different flours of choice. So I've added in einkorn flour before. It is a really nice substitute if you don't have unbleached. You can add in whole wheat flour, you can add in rye flour. I just wouldn't recommend doing any kind of a bleached flour. That's a definite no in the world of sourdough. Okay, so let's talk about sourdough maintenance. So once you have your starter in a bowl like this, how do you maintain it? Anytime you use it, you're gonna wanna feed it after every use. So for example, if I'm gonna be making pancakes with this in the morning, I will take out 2 cups of the starter in the morning when I make my pancakes. And before I put this starter back in the fridge, I'll feed it 2 cups of water and 2 cups of flour. I basically am just replenishing what I used. Once I feed my starter, I like to set it on the counter for a couple of hours to activate and to ferment and really break down that flour that I just put in it. And then I'll put it in the fridge to let it rest or to slow down the fermentation process, because I probably won't use it for a few more days. If I'm making 2 sourdough recipes in the same day, I'll take out my sourdough that I'm using for the recipe, I'll refeed it, I'll set it on the counter, and a few hours later, I'll be good to go with another active and bubbly starter. So as long as you just check in on it every once in a while and make sure that there's no black layer on top of it, it's called hooch, and it's like a grayish black water that happens on the top, you should be good to go. And if hooch does start to happen on the top of your starter, it just means the starter is hungry and it needs a little bit of feeding. So throw in a cup of flour and a cup of water and stir in that gray layer to your starter, and it should be just fine. So that's it. That's the process. How to make a sourdough starter from scratch and how to maintain one. I know you can do it. Don't forget to like and subscribe down below, and I will see you in the next video.